Welcome back, everybody. Beautiful Monday morning, off and rolling here. The first Monday of the month. Finally feels like fall out there. It's fantastic. We have reached October, which means we'll have our first playoff unveil coming up later this month, which means the bracket is starting to come into focus here. And as I mentioned off the top of the show, there was a time on Saturday where all five of the top five teams in the latest FCS poll were either trailing or in trouble or in a ball game, which we haven't been able to say yet really this season. Certainly in Fargo, we haven't been able to say that. Means our guy Sam Herder here joins us each and every Monday at 9:35 to break down the latest of what's going on in FCS football. I was following your tweets as well as the game is going on. First off, night games in October just take forever. I was not thrilled about that, but seeing everybody else play on Saturday, and I was struck with that. Tarleton was behind. The Bison were trailing. The Jackrabbits were down by 10. Montana was in serious trouble at halftime with Idaho State. It was a bizarre weekend. Just from now, the teams ended up winning, but at times, man, it looked hairy for a bit.
Yeah, it seems like at least one weekend every year, there's a totally chaotic weekend in the FCS, and we were somewhat close to getting that this last weekend, but it ended up going chalk through the top five. But I mean, yeah, for at least each of the top five teams, at least for a little bit or for most of the game, were on upset alerts. I mean, NDSU was down early, but then got the lead back and then kind of pulled away in the fourth quarter. But that was a game going into the fourth. South Dakota State was in trouble at halftime. They were down by 10 before really establishing the run. Tarleton State was in a shootout with Southern Utah. That was in a battle of the backup quarterbacks, and so both starters were out in that one. Montana was down by 10 going into the fourth quarter before they pulled out a win there. Montana State dominated that game for the last three quarters, but the first quarter at Northern Arizona in a ranked match was just an ugly start, and the Cats were down 7-0, but they figured out a way to kind of pull out of that funk and get a win there. And you can even go beyond that because number 7 UC Davis, they were in a close game with Cal Poly. Yep. Davis was number 7, and then the upset didn't happen until we got to number 8, and that was Rhodey on Friday night, losing to Brown, an unranked team, who, by the way, Harvard beat the crap out of Brown the week before, and then Brown beats number 8 Rhode Island. So how good is Harvard, or is Rhodey overrated? I don't know, but yeah, each of the top 8 teams, and Illinois State was obviously number 6, were in battles at some points on Saturday.
Yeah, I'll get to Rhode Island in a second because I'm going to pour on them here in a minute. Let's start with Montana State. I know that's your team of the week. The Cats have won 4 in a row after starting 0-2. Have they figured things out?
It seems so, yeah. And they had that kind of sloppy second half a few weeks ago against Mercyhurst, and people were kind of wondering, what was going on with the Cats. But then they turned around and they really hammered Eastern Washington last week. And then this week was probably their second toughest FCS test, going to Northern Arizona, who's a ranked team. A tough place to play. And like I said, it was a sloppy game to start. There was penalties and no real flow, and Northern Arizona came out swinging, and it was a 7-0 lead for the Lumberjacks. I mean, you kind of felt like, okay, now we'll see what Montana State is made of. Can they dig out of this kind of a lull that they're in, or will the Cats kind of find themselves in a shootout? And they really dominated from there. They ended up winning pretty handedly, 34-10, and their defense, I think, is probably the most complete unit that they've had under Brent Vegan. Defensive line, linebackers, secondary, I think they're actually much improved from last year, despite losing a lot of seniors from last year. And then the offense, I think, is just starting to get going as well. I think we've talked about before. They kind of have a new scheme. They're throwing the ball around a little bit more, and that's going to take time, but it feels like they're starting to gel and really putting things together.
I think Justin Lamson's starting to get together their quarterback as well. I mean, you couldn't have had a harder start. I remember talking with Veeks about this when we were in Frisco in January. Like, okay, you're opening with Oregon and the Jacks. Doesn't matter who was coming back. That was going to be a gauntlet to start. And it wouldn't be surprising if they were 0-2. I don't know if anybody was ready to wave the panic alarm in Bozeman, but now they've settled in here, and now they've got a stretch where they can maybe start reeling off some wins.
Yeah, and even after the Cats dropped to 0-2, I didn't bump them off my number 3 spots. I kept them right there. Now they bumped back to 4 for me just because Montana now has a couple of ranked wins. But I remember even after the Cats were off to an 0-2 start, like looking at their schedule and saying, okay, if they get through Northern Arizona, which is going to be their toughest test, they should
Yes.
win throughout until they get to the Brawl of the Wild, which is in Montana, this year. And so I do expect the Cats to go on a nice run here of wins, and then we'll see what happens in the Brawl. But as we've seen this last weekend, if you come out kind of sloppy, a little sleepy, like there's a lot of teams that maybe you wouldn't even expect that can give you a game. But I think maybe this was maybe a bit of a wake up call for Montana State, and I think they're going to go on a run here.
What do we make of the Jackrabbits? What happened with them on Saturday night?
Yeah, the first half was not good for South Dakota State.
No.
Defensively, I actually thought defensively they played decent in the first half, but the quarterback run game, Bo Brungard is a really dangerous quarterback with his arm and his legs. But offensively for South Dakota State, like they just couldn't get the game going at all in the first half. And Chase Mason, who had been excellent leading up to this point, he was just a little bit off. Accuracy wasn't there, and so the offense looked really, really choppy in the first half. And going into halftime, you kind of thought, okay, like Youngstown State is selling out to stop the run. So I mean, Chase Mason and his receivers, they're going to have to, win this game on their own. And Lofton Ogrowski was out with a shoulder injury. I think he should be back pretty soon, I would think. But then the running game started to get going for South Dakota State, and Loffridge ran for 4 touchdowns, 150 plus yards, something like that. Most of that damage came in the second half. So I don't know if South Dakota State really switched anything up or they just kept on hammering away and chipping away and eventually really starting to get a push at Youngstown State.
Yeah, I know every Bison fan that was in Normal was following their phones and looking like, oh, wow, when Youngstown got up by 10, starting to probably prematurely celebrate about that. And obviously the Jacks got their act together. But that, coupled with what was happening in Normal with the Bison game, that goes back to your first point with these highly ranked teams that go on the road knowing everyone's coming out to beat you. You cannot, and again, Illinois State came in ranked 6th. Northern Arizona is in the top 15. These aren't chump teams that you have to come out and play hard or else you're going to get beat.
Yeah, and I wrote this too. I still think the top five has kind of separated itself. Southern Illinois to me is the number 6 team.
Yep.
Maybe they're in that group. We'll
We'll
find
find
out
out.
this week. But I still think there's a bit of a separation there. But that second tier is still good enough where if you play a C level game, like they're good enough to beat you. Even if you play a B minus level game, they can hang tough. But great teams find a way to pull out wins. And when you're facing these teams, and NSU is used to this as well, but now Montana and Montana State are getting this, and South Dakota State is used to it, but Tarleton State is now seeing this where teams are going to pull out all the stops to beat you. And I had heard going into that game that Southern Utah, they're going to do 2 quarterbacks, they're going to onside kick, they were working on a fake punt, like they basically said like, screw it. Like,
Yeah.
what do we have to lose? We're going to put everything into this game. And I think these top 5 teams are, seeing that like, hey, we're going to get everyone's best shot. They're going to put some things on film that they hadn't, or they're going to put some things on the field that they hadn't shown on the film. So, it's when you're the hunted, sometimes things can get difficult, but these great teams have found a way to get a win.
All right, let me go to, you mentioned Tarleton, who barely got by Southern Utah there. The top 5 is certainly, I think, set itself up. Our staff was talking about this because we had too much time on our hands on Saturday getting ready for the Bison game. Let's say Montana goes and runs the table, and Tarleton does too. Tarleton has the FBS win. Montana has a non-D1 win. How would that come down in your mind if we get to there in late November?
Yeah, that non-D1 win certainly could be a factor for Montana, but I still feel like the Grizz would have, a stronger strength of schedule, and they would probably have more ranked wins. Just going through Tarleton's schedule right now, I
Right.
mean, they potentially have 3 ranked wins on their schedule, and so that would be a pretty good resume for Tarleton. But you look at Montana, and the Grizz would have maybe 3, 4 ranked wins. Including in this scenario, the Grizz would have beaten Montana State,
Yep.
who I would still expect to be in the top 5. And if they when we're talking about these sort of nitpicky things, like margin of win could be a big difference in that one. And we've seen in the Brawl of the Wild, the home team have, a decided advantage
Yep.
in really hammering the opposing team. So if Montana beats Montana State by 3 points, that's a great win. But if the Grizz beat Montana State by 17 or 21 points, they're going to compare that to South Dakota State's win. And maybe South Dakota State has, 1 loss, and that's the NDSU. And so that really props Montana's win
Yep.
up. So, I don't know. We'll see how the committee views Tarleton State. I will say that going undefeated for Tarleton State would move the needle more than going undefeated through the SoCon or through the Southland because I do think the UAC is good
Is
and they
better.
would
Yep.
have potentially three ranked wins plus an FBS win. Like that would be a really, really good resume. We've also seen the committee kind of lean more heavily toward the Dakota schools, the Montana schools. I remember a couple of years or 3 years ago, I think in 2022, like Sac State on paper had the better resume than South Dakota State, but South Dakota State still got the one seed.
Yep.
And then UIW went to Sac State and got a win in the quarterfinals. So it does seem like the committee still kind of leans toward, the brand names a little bit, but there are like 7 or 8 new committee members this year. And so you never really know what each
Yeah.
individual is going to think on this.
All right, let's unzip here what happened with Rhode Island. They lost to Brown. Brown was picked 8th in the Ivy preseason poll. I think all year you and I have both been in the same mindset. We're not sure what to make of Rhode Island, if maybe the best team in the CAA. I dropped them, I think, to 20 in my poll. I'm really interested. They might not. I doubt they're going to drop that far in the actual ballot. What do we make of Rhode Island, and what do we make actually of the Ivy League as well?
Yeah, so I think Rhodey had good expectations and for good reason coming into this year. They lost to Mercer in the second round last year without their starting quarterback. Had he been playing, there's a chance that it would have been Rhodey coming to Fargo instead of Mercer. And Rhodey, they returned a good amount of their offensive production. Defense had a lot more to replace, but AJ Pena, who's potentially,
Yeah.
a favorite for the Buck Buchanan Award, he was coming back. So that kind of sets the stage on why Rhodey was so highly ranked. And they started the year 4-0. And some of the teams they beat at the time looked like good wins. I mean, they beat Stony Brook, who we thought was kind of on the verge of being a top 25 team. They beat Holy Cross 9-7, and Holy Cross, I think the week before, or the week after, nearly beat Northern Illinois. So we're like, okay, Holy Cross is pretty decent. That's another good win. But now in hindsight, like Stony Brook has fallen off.
Yep.
Holy Cross is
0
0
and 6.
0
Yeah.
6
0 and
right now.
6 now. Yep.
And Harvard hammered Holy Cross. And so again, we go back to Harvard. They've dominated teams that Rhodey has either lost to in Brown or barely beat in Holy Cross. So I think the warning signs were already there. Plus last week, I mean, they lost to Western Michigan 47-14. I know that's an FBS opponent, but I actually thought Rhodey was going to stay in that game, and so you lose like that. I think it was a warning sign about Rhodey. And then we saw it, against Brown. It was a
Oh.
two-score game for a good chunk of the fourth quarter before they made it a one-possession game. And I don't know how good Brown is, honestly, because again, they lost pretty handily to Harvard, but this is a tough loss for Rhodey. And it's a rivalry game too, and so sometimes you can throw out records in that case. But I just thought Rhodey really looked sloppy in this one.
All right, the poll is out as you were talking, Sam. Rhode Island dropped to 17. They were 8 last week. They're at 17. I mean, that's probably fair, but again, I don't know how good they are. I don't know how good the CAA is as our overarching statement on that. Let's get to your spotlight games. Led off by one here in Fargo. SIU NDSU is going to be, I think, fantastic on Saturday.
Yeah, I'll have to double check the rankings when they come out here, or as they come out. But I believe we're gonna have 4 ranked matchups.
There we go.
I don't know if Youngstown State is still ranked or not.
They dropped
That could-
out. We'll still get them.
they
Come
did?
on. Yeah, they dropped out, but they still should be ranked in our opinion.
Yeah, they should be. I mean, that's kind of unfortunate for UND because Youngstown State goes to UND,
Yes.
and I think it's a fabulous matchup right there in the Valley. But I think this week is highlighted another game in North Dakota, Southern Illinois going to NDSU. I think this is going to be a dynamite game. I really really like DJ Williams, the quarterback for Southern Illinois. We'll see. I think the Salukis are pretty good defensively, but there are times when they haven't offered as much resistance as you would expect. So that's a really good matchup right there. In Fargo, an opportunity for NDSU through the non-conference, and we're questioning their opponents, and now this is their third straight ranked opponent for NDSU, so they can pad their resume a little bit more. Another good one is Northern Arizona going to UC Davis. UC Davis unfortunately lost Rex Connors to a season-ending knee injury. He's a really really good safety for them, and unfortunately, even more unfortunately, he suffered his knee injury 2 games ago when they used him as a running back. Or maybe it was a Wildcat quarterback. I can't remember, but they used him on the goal line for a rushing touchdown. He got hurt that way, so that's really tough for UC Davis, but a good challenge for them hosting a ranked Northern Arizona team. Then the UAC, Abilene Christian goes to West Georgia. West Georgia finally suffered its first loss of the season. They lost to Austin P, a team that Abilene Christian beat, so that's another good ranked matchup right there. And then Youngstown State, going to UND, talked about that one. I thought it was going to be a ranked matchup. probably should be a ranked matchup with how good Youngstown State looked, but UND looked really good.
Yes.
On the road this last week and going to northern Iowa. Kaminsky continues to look really, really good. He's kind of as a sophomore, like he's what you would call like a franchise quarterback for them. He's played outstanding this year.
Yeah, that was UND's first road win in 700 days. Just think about that. We've talked about it. You and I have done this segment for the last few years on Monday mornings of UND being great at home and then not being able to win on the road. Well, I know Northern Iowa's down, but you got to win the game, and they've done that. Now, the next two for UND are really interesting, Sam. We'll do this before we get you out of here. Youngstown at home, and then they go to Carbondale next week. If you want to be in the upper echelon, you got to win both those games.
Yeah, you like UND at home this week because they play so well,
Yep.
and they'll have to obviously defend quarterback run against Bo Brungar. But I really like how UND's offense is humming. And then next week, not to look too far ahead, but yeah, going to Southern Illinois. Like I said, I really like SIU. I think they're looking strong this year, and UND I think is still kind of hovering around the teens. Nationally, but there's a lot of people that have UND ranked in the top 10.
I do. You do.
Yep, myself included as well. They have a chance to prove it now in these next couple of weeks because UND has gotten into the top 10 in past years, but then they've kind of bounced out of that top 10. So these next two games are an opportunity for UND to keep on proving that they belong in that top 10.
Eric, don't get mad at me. I got to let email. I got to ask Sam about. Dom, can you ask Sam what in the world the Sac State president was talking about late last week about them being FBS again? Do we know? Like, I've tuned it out now.
Yeah, so he went on. It's called the Grizz Fan Pod, but I think they have like a radio show as well. So it's just a podcast with like two or three Montana fans. And so they invited him on the podcast, and Dr. Luke Wood went on there, and he had an interesting quote because he said in November I think I can say we're going to announce that we will be playing FBS and potentially part of a new FBS conference, in 2026.
What?
But that quote got clipped. But right before that, he also said we're exploring options of going to an FBS conference outside of our footprint or just playing an FBS schedule as an FCS independent. And I'm like, boom, right there. Like that's what I think you guys are gonna do.
Right.
Like I don't know why he said new FBS conference because that is what got like quoted, in all these tweets that went semi-viral. But I pointed out right before that he said like they might play FBS opponents as an FCS team. I think that's what they're gonna do, but we'll find out. There's been a lot of empty promises or half-filled promises. But I don't know. I do encourage people to listen to that interview because I'm not saying he's going to make a believer out of everybody, but you can kind of see his point of view on some of these things. And I've always kind of somewhat defended Sac State and their push to go FBS. I think it makes sense for them. Some of the messaging and empty promises I kind of push back on, but overall, I think he has the right image. I just think maybe they need to hold back on making some of these promises if they don't know for sure if they can deliver them.
Great stuff as always, bud. Thanks for doing this. We'll talk next week, okay?
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Sam Herder joins us each and every Monday to get us rolling with what happened in the FCS world. Again, top 5 teams were all challenged, but they all won on this past Saturday. We'll break. We come back. We'll wrap up our first hour. Jeff Kolpak coming up in hour 2 to unpack the Bison victory in Normal and a bunch of other topics as well as we roll on a Overreaction Monday. We're back on Hot Mic right after this.